What's up, everybody? Lou from Hypocritic here. We are at the Riftbound Regional Qualifiers here in Las Vegas, back with Michael Sherman, the head of Esports for Riftbound. Thanks so much for taking some time again.
Thanks for coming out.
Great to see you.
Absolutely.
So, we are winding down here at Vegas, the third major regionals level event outside of China after Bologna and Houston before it. How's the weekend been? Give us some key takeaways from your perspective.
Yeah, this has been a great way to just kind of show off the learnings and the excitement and kind of continue to build momentum, starting with Houston into Bologna and now Vegas. Just really exciting energy in there. I personally have just gotten to slam games all weekend, which is great when I can do that because it kind of just speaks to how I think a lot of things are going. And so it's been really enjoyable. How's your time been?
It's been so much fun. I was going to say, it's great when you get to slam games at an event based around games.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's been a ton of fun for us, too, you know, between competing in main event and digging into all the different side events and how, we're going to get into this, obviously, but how much less friction there's been and just sort of engaging with that sort of stuff and doing the things we like to do. It's been a wonderful time. And just, you know, having these events as a celebration of the game still in its kind of nascent form is wonderful. So it's been so much fun. So let's talk about a little bit of that maybe.
Sure.
So having come from Houston and Bologna now and having had a couple of turns at the crank at this to sort of understand how do we make these events smoother? How do we get more interesting things for players to do? When you look back on some of the learnings from Houston and even from Bologna just a week ago, can you talk a little bit about some of the key things that you and the teams focused on to be like, all right, here's things we can improve, here's things we can try, let's do this at Vegas. What did that all look like for you?
Yeah, I know. There were a handful of places that we really kind of came out of Houston and wanted to look at. First was sort of main event format and sort of reimagining what day 2 looked like, last time being the top 64 single elimination and really kind of extending into the additional Swiss rounds into top cut. That went really well, I think, in Bologna, and still presented like a really exciting, diverse group up at the top with 5 different legends in top 8, and then out here in Vegas, I think people got to see some more of like the evolution on things like side events and kind of honing in. There's new events like draft and kind of some updates around the on-demands and pre-registration, and I think a lot of that's been really well received. And then even just kind of like really, kind of detailed changes of like how are we flipping around how much of what stock we're selling during the weekend. You know, I think if you put a limited supply on Friday and then it sells out and you do it again on Saturday, it's like, cool, now I have to stand in line twice to get something that may potentially sell out. And it's, on the other hand, right now it's kind of set up in a way that like, hey, you can do the things, it's going to be very clear if it's there or not, and then you can really plan out the rest of your weekend accordingly.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And with that, you know, a considerable focus for players, again, removing that kind of friction and making it as easy as possible for players to come in, do the things they want, get what they want to get, and continue on with the weekend. Wonderful. So the more, you know, the smoother that goes, the better. In terms of implementing some of these changes and looking at, you know, all the, you know, modifications that were done, you know, from pre-registration for a lot of these events, you know, voucher considerations, all this sort of different stuff. Can you go a little deeper on how you and the team consider and start to implement those sort of changes when you look at specific things that you want to change? You know, for example, we don't have to use that as an example, but moving to a pre-registration for the events instead of doing it all on site. Can you go a little deeper into what that experience is like for Riot in terms of not just deciding what to do, but then executing on those changes and making them real?
Yeah, you know, I think events are just kind of a combination of a lot of different systems, and you kind of go in there and you get to look around and see like what systems are working, what systems are not. Houston, there was a ton of lines, simply put. And I think even going into Houston, we knew we wanted to tackle things like pre-registration as a way to alleviate those. But when, you know, you really kind of, those things move pretty quickly up to the priority when you have a full event full of people in lines. And so even pre-registration now, I would say there's some things we want to work through in it, but you know, it's helpful that when everybody on the team is really at these events and kind of soaking it all in, everybody comes away with very similar, like, where do we want to focus and iterate? And we do that really in deep collaboration with UVS on how to kind of like, since they're the ones building and kind of implementing a lot of that, we try and make sure it's like collaborative and sharing back and forth. What did we see? What did they see? So yeah.
And I know so many arms of the company go very deep in that partnership with UVS as well. So it's good to have that kind of back and forth. One other major element of it is obviously the best of pricing and encouraging not just diversification of the meta through encouraging people to go after these specific chase cards and pricing, but also ensuring that there is a healthy representation of everything around, even, you know, with still just 2 sets in, encouraging, every legend possible to be there.
Yeah.
At this point, it seems like it really is a positive, healthy thing for these kinds of events and keeping players engaged, not just with trying out different, domain types, but engaging with their favorite legends too and chasing all that, bringing a personal element to it. Can you talk about the importance of maintaining something like best of prizing throughout events like this? What sort of advantages it brings to the player base beyond the obvious stuff we just talked about, and other sort of advantages and cool things from your perspective?
I think in the earliest days of Riftbound and kind of trying to figure out what makes the game unique, how do we set it apart, sort of the champion fantasy really stood out. And so many players from League of Legends are coming into this with, I love, Ahri. And so I want to build around Ahri. And I think what was always in our mind is how can we make sure that a very competitive player base, people that are really excited to go deep with this game, how do we make sure that it's not punishing them to kind of take a step towards winning the event? And I think Best Of has been just the perfect solve for that. Really kind of encouraging this, if you want to just if you want to try to win Ezreal and be that best Ezreal, not only is that a place in the community that kind of is an achievement that's very different and kind of has its own mastery associated with it than just kind of saying you want to chase top 8. And so when we look at it now here and see, every legend continuing to be represented, three big events in, and then even how those are making it into day 2 and deep into the tournament, it's not only exciting because you have that representation, but it's kind of creating an ecosystem where there is the ability for a meta to be disrupted. Really, really, really good players are trying to push the boundaries of what you can do with each legend, and it helps just ensure that a lot of that that high level meta doesn't just become the only thing you're watching over and over again.
Yeah, and to have that ability to keep, like you said, keep it diverse, keep it fresh, and so much of the play style of, we're going to go in with what we want. We're going to try to make it fun. We're going to expand and explore. Again, even with just a 2-set meta so far, there is so much creativity you can have. You can plug in different text for different things. The sideboards go nuts, right? Yeah. So it's that level of diversification and encouraging it is always wonderful to see. What's it like from your perspective watching these metas evolve and understand how top 8's going, and you see so much diversity, chasing the best ofs and whatever? As a player yourself, as someone who is deep into TCGs and has been for a long time, that's got to be fun for you too, I imagine.
I think it's fun because it's again this idea that you want to go into I have favorite champions from League that I am just so excited for when they come out. And I think that the idea that there's sort of proof points all across the board right now that there is ways and play styles and opportunities for just about every legend. Sure, maybe not just always at that peak top 8 level in every game, but it is really nice to go into this and be one day I want to play a Fiddlesticks, and it's exciting to me to think about seeing people evolve on Fiddlesticks and how that's going to show up, and it gets me excited to be a Fiddlesticks main in sort of this game as well.
So much the long-term hype is amazing, and you do see a lot of people theory crafting it and wondering how they can expand and build on the things that they love the most, and there should be that sort of community aspect to it, which is a phenomenal segue because that's where we're going next. In terms of working with the community on these kinds of things and staying plugged into the being responsive to their concerns, understanding where pain points actually are, I imagine that there's some degree of feedback and back and forth between Riot and players of all levels of notoriety, not just tournament winners, not just top 8ers, not just really significant players, but people who casually engage with it and maybe those who are doing it as they can. So can you talk a little bit about how, from an organized play perspective, you work with community figures, notable and not, to help shape that experience going into regionals, changing the experiences, figuring out what's going to work in the future?
I think it's really cool, the setup. We do have a bunch of kind of creators and notable players here, and we try and go out of our way to just catch up with them and really understand what's on their mind. And then we also have things in place like card slinging and the ability to just sit down and chat with players all throughout the weekend and kind of hear what they're experiencing, what their take is. That just kind of sitting down and playing brings out so much conversation and things that are on people's mind. And whether it's them saying, I have feedback, or them just saying oh yeah, I tried to do so-and-so, but I couldn't. It just kind of, that immediately gives you the what's on people's minds, where's the friction, where can we kind of alleviate pain points and really continue to level up the experience. And then there's there's a lot of also talking to people from other communities as well and trying to understand like what exists elsewhere, or what would your expectations be for Riftbound, and really trying to make sure that we're kind of building a whole group of feedback and input. I think my favorite part of the whole thing is really the ideation and figuring out like where do we want to build around, and so much of that is like trying to build it around the player perspective and what players are not only telling us that they want to see, but also trying to also preempt kind of what's on their mind, and where we can go kind of change the dynamic.
Yeah, 100%. And getting that feedback from all perspective, obviously there's going to be common threads, so you're going to hear the same thing a lot of the time probably, if it is something that touches a lot of players individually. But it's great to just sort of get that feedback casually too. You're on the ground with people who are experiencing this every day potentially, and looking forward to these kinds of things. So that's got to be very, very helpful.
Yeah.
Let's look forward a little bit.
Sure.
So obviously a huge competitive roadmap still left for 2026 in terms of regional sized events in the United States and internationally. When you're preparing for these kinds of things and going again for the next kind of turn of the crank, what are you sort of most looking forward to from your perspective to gear things up for things like Atlanta or Lille or some ones beyond them? Maybe don't have to talk about specific things you're focusing on yet, but kind of at a high level, what are you looking forward to iterating on or trying or just generally hyped for?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big ones that's been my focus going into this year has been kind of the iteration on ticketing. So, switching over to Eventbrite for those Lille and Atlanta, and that's probably like that was the biggest friction point going into this next round. That was like our highest priority, just already having gone through those, a big take for us is that there's still a lot of work to do there. But step one was have a platform that won't fall over, that will kind of like give players confidence that when they're told that like they didn't get a ticket, it's not because of something they couldn't control. And we can continue to layer on bells and whistles and support there. I'm not saying that we've like magically reinvented anything, but it's trying to like make sure that experience for Lille and Atlanta gets to a better spot, because we are in this now phase of we have so many events and some things do take runway to really roll out. And so what can we do now? What can we do from Bologna to Vegas? What can we do from Vegas to Atlanta and Lille? And then looking even further down the roadmap, that's where we can start to also roll out a lot of those like larger overhauls.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And that's actually a really good segue into what we'll button this up with, which is just attendance and ticketing and being here at all. So obviously these events are enormously popular and a seemingly insatiable demand. I think you posted or someone did that there was something like 4 or 5 times the amount of interest in this particular regionals than could be accommodated.
Yeah.
Even with the degree that these events have expanded, even since Houston, I think there was something like 5,000 total attendees here or more, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And yet there's still so much more interest, but there's a balance that has to be struck, I imagine, between scaling these events up sustainably and helping more people get in the door without making these so insane that it's unmanageable.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that balancing process from your perspective? Again, trying to find that middle ground between we want more people to get in, but we also want them to have a good experience and not compromise on either side.
No, I think that's a great question, and something on our mind is we're going to continue to look at how we can scale up those events. And one of the challenges is always, okay, you've increased your floor print. That means that you need to hire more X, Y, and Z, which means you maybe need to also hire more people to manage that group. And then you do have this kind of like scaling challenge that's not just bodies, but it's hard to kind of organize a group as you get bigger and bigger. And so there is like some risk to just straight up, let's crank it up to 10. So we're being really careful all throughout the calendar year this year around how do we increase the size of each event. Just continuing to tune, and as we get sharper and sharper, we can increase the number of people in the main event or slightly increase attendees overall. But then we also can think about what are the other ways that we can kind of give opportunities to the community to address some of the demand. Can we work with more third-party events? There's a whole host of great third-party events, and what can Riot do to help make that experience not one-to-one mirror these, not in a bad way, but like how can we help give some of the learnings and the great things from these events and help deliver those to these other events, so that like, look, there might not be a regional qualifier in your area, or even with the demand, you're like, I can't go that far. I think that there's an opportunity for us to kind of leverage the ecosystem and the community around it, and not just increase our own events, but to figure out how to go deeper in partnerships with others.
It's about finding those touch points, right?
Yeah.
And you're right, it is, geographic concerns are obviously huge. Scale and size of events is huge. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The more ways that people can engage with it in an official capacity, the better.
Yeah.
And everyone gets to play, and that's the ultimate goal. Right?
Absolutely.
That's plenty, I think. Michael Sherman from Riot, thank you so much for the time as always. Keep it tuned here to Hypocritic GG for more from the Las Vegas Regional Qualifiers all weekend long.